Hello everybody, this is my next video for my channel and I am about to talk about the epic follow-up to The Hobbit, and this is The Lord of the Rings. Yes, long before Peter Jackson did his live-action trilogy in 2001 to 2003, there actually was a Lord of the Rings movie made. An animated version that came out back in 1978 by animation filmmaker Ralph Bakshi, which I will say at the time was a very daunting challenge because without a doubt many filmmakers have attempted to do a Lord of the Rings movie. One included John Boorman, who is best known for doing films like Deliverance, Zardoz, Exorcist 2, and Excalibur, and he actually tried to adapt all three books into one screenplay, which was just, yeah, it fell apart real quick, you can imagine. Even the Beatles, I heard, attempted a Lord of the Rings movie. Yes, the rock band The Beatles. And there was even a rumor that Stanley Kubrick attempted one too. And again, I don't know if that's true or not. If it is, that's interesting to hear about. But I will say I have to give Ralph Bakshi the benefit of the doubt, since, going the animation route for The Lord of the Rings was probably the wiser decision at the time, since doing live action was, again, a very daunting task. But the movie did have drawbacks, plenty of them. Obviously, when the film came out theatrically in 1978, it was a moderate hit. It really was. But unfortunately, the backslash, the critical and the fan reaction was not exactly pleasant. The critical reception of the film was mostly mixed, but the fan reaction was even worse, because there were a lot of people that felt that this was just a total disgrace to the books. But I think the biggest problem was the fact that this movie does not chronicleize all three books of the trilogy. It only chronicleizes the first two, The Fellowship of the Ring and The Two Towers. Return of the King never got made. But The Return of the King did eventually get made as an animated film that came out a couple years later by the same group that did The Hobbit, Arthur Rankin Jr. and Jules Bass. Well, there were a couple. Well, at least there's one big reason why Ralph Bakshi didn't do part two for Lord of the Rings. One is because he didn't have the money. And you know what? I'm kind of surprised, because United Artists, the company that owned the Lord of the Rings prior to Warner Brothers getting the home video release, I don't know why they wouldn't put up the money to do Lord of the Rings Part 2. But there's also some fans that felt that with the movie, it should have been called The Lord of the Rings Part 1, because that's pretty much what the movie is. It chronicleizes the first two books, and not Return of the King. And Peter Jackson was able to do all three books, but as three separate films. So, it did upset many fans, because they were like, oh, come on, really? And yeah, there were some parts of the film that did surprise people, like, at one point, Saruman, the White Wizard of the Order, at one point, Gandalf refers to him as Aruman. And when I heard that, I was like, who's that? The reason why I heard, now there's a reason behind that. One reason is, actually, this is what it is. Saruman often was referred to as Aruman because apparently the words Saruman and Sauron sound similar. Which, yeah, they kind of do. They do sound a little similar, and I think they did that deliberately to avoid confusion. But any fan who read the book would immediately know. But anybody who didn't and is just diving into this film for the first time, well, this was back in 1978, so you got to remember, this was the first and only attempt to bring Tolkien's epic novel to the big screen. And this was, of course, many, many years before Peter Jackson dived in and made his version. So this is the only version of The Lord of the Rings that fans had access to, with the exception of Return of the King, which I'll get to in another video. But yeah, basically the story is pretty, well, even though it's an epic story, it's pretty simple. A hobbit named Frodo Baggins is basically given the One Ring. It's actually the One Ring that Bilbo found in the Gollum's cave in The Hobbit. and it's entrusted to him. And he finds out later that this ring is actually the bane of the Dark Lord Sauron. It's his life force. It's the ring he crafted to rule over them all. Hence the term one ring to rule them all. And he goes on a quest with a group of people, including fellow hobbits, the wizard Gandalf, men, a dwarf, and an elf, to basically head toward Mount Doom to destroy the ring by basically casting it into the fire where it was forged. So that's pretty much the gist of the story. But as I've said before, being an animated film, and of course, my personal opinion on the movie, I've seen the film, unfortunately, after I saw the Peter Jackson versions. So, unfortunately, yeah, it was kind of underwhelming, but at the same time, I have to give it the benefit of the doubt for being, at the time, the first attempt at bringing this epic story to the big screen. So I have to give Ralph Bakshi the benefit of the doubt. And honestly, there are aspects of the film that do look really good. Like, the illustrations in the film are amazing. And the musical score by Leonard Rosenman is, again, very good. It's a great score to listen to, but it is definitely not the powerful, epic music that Howard Shore gave to Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. But nonetheless, though, it still comes together very well. There are some good voice actors in the film, like they got John Hurt to be the voice of Aragorn, which, he's got a very distinctive voice, and, it's always fun to hear him talk. And they even got C-3PO from Star Wars. Anthony Daniels is the voice of Legolas the Elf, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. Other than that, I really can't think of anybody else. And actor Philip Stone, who actually worked with Stanley Kubrick on Clockwork Orange and The Shining, does the voice of King Theoden, but again, it's not exactly a voice you're going to be familiar with unless you watch the credits of the movie, and you'll recognize his name. So, other than that, though, the movie itself is, like I said, it does feel underwhelming, but I still have to give it the benefit of the doubt for, being a attempt at bringing this epic story to the big screen. So, now on to the Blu-ray. Yes, The Lord of the Rings, instead of just a regular DVD release like The Hobbit, it eventually did get a Blu-ray release by Warner Brothers, a remastered deluxe edition. So inside here are actually two discs, Blu-ray and the DVD. And normally everybody would put the Blu-ray on this side, but I always put it on the left. I don't know why. I always put it on the left there. Basically, both the Blu-ray and the DVD have the same exact extras as anything else. The Blu-ray, like I said, just has the uptick in video and audio. So the video quality, unfortunately, is it's an extreme mixed bag. Even though it says on the front of the case here, Remastered Deluxe Edition, unfortunately, there is not really much in the way of remastered. This isn't exactly a Disney film. Unfortunately, the animation, it's kind of a mess throughout the entire movie. It's grainy. This is one movie that really could have used a complete restoration, but unfortunately, Warner Brothers didn't do that. Like I said, if this was released by Disney, they would have done that. They would have done a complete restoration on the film. But unfortunately, they didn't. There are parts of the film that actually look really good. And there are parts of the film that, unfortunately, do not look good. But I will say, when it comes to comparing it to the DVD, it definitely is better. But not that much better. I would say a smidgen better than any of the previous home video releases. So for the video quality, I would say out of 5 stars, I would probably give it a 3. A 3 at the most. I'm bordering on 3.5, but I'm going to have to stick with the 3 rating because, like I said, it's better than the DVD, but this is one film that could really use a restoration. It's not even available in 4K yet, so maybe for the 4K release, maybe they will actually give it a restoration. Who knows? The audio, well, I will say the audio actually is better than the video, surprisingly. And it definitely sounds better. Many parts of but it is one of those things where the audio, once again, you might have to crank up the volume a little bit because even though it's in DTS 5.1 HD, there are parts that where, it definitely sounds distant. Now, I will say the dialogue does come out very well. And unfortunately, although there are action scenes in this movie, obviously nowhere near as intense as what is in the Peter Jackson versions, but still, again, the audio comes out very well. Sound effects are really good, and anytime you hear, unlike in The Hobbit where sound effects were missing, at least in The Lord of the Rings, you actually do get sound effects. So that's one thing I will have to give it credit. I do have to give it a benefit on. So the audio, I would say out of 5 stars, the audio gets a 3.5, 3.5. Definitely stronger than the video, but not that much stronger. So my personal opinion, I think the audio is without a doubt the highlight of the Blu-ray. Now for the bonus features, well, hard to believe there really is not much on here in the way of of that. But there is much more on here than what there was on the DVD for The Hobbit. Basically, for bonus features, all you get is just this little documentary called Forging Through the Darkness, the Ralph Bakshi vision for The Lord of the Rings. It runs about 30 minutes long, and it's basically an in-depth interview with Ralph Bakshi and many of his colleagues, including one of the screenwriters of the film, Chris Conkling, as he talks about his experience on the movie. And it also talks about, there's even a guy that wrote a book about Ralph Bakshi and his style. And there's even interviews with his son and his daughter, Ralph Bakshi's own son and daughter, as they talk about, their father's legacy. And of course, the documentary puts all the focus on, basically on The Lord of the Rings. So that's pretty much it for bonus features. And the only other extra that's not featured back here on the case, but it is on the Blu-ray when you start it up, is a trailer for Star Wars: The Clone Wars, and that's about it. So for the extras, like I said, the documentary is well worth a look if you're a fan of the movie. You should either you can watch it before or after, totally up to you, depending on your preference. I would say out of 5 stars, the bonus features would get a 1.5. Because at least we actually get a documentary on the film itself. Again, not really much in the way of extras, but still what's there, will be enough to satisfy fans. Of course, it's nowhere near as good as the massive supplemental package that accompanied the Lord of the Rings movies on Blu-ray. If you got the extended versions, because the extended versions come with a wealth of material. And I'll eventually cover the Lord of the Rings and even the Peter Jackson's Hobbit trilogy in later videos, because, I love those movies so much. So, my final ranking of the movie, I would give it, out of 5 stars, I would say 3.5. 3.5 out of 5. That's my personal ranking for the movie. I do have mixed feelings of the film, but I will say, in the end, it definitely covers the movie. It definitely covers the book very well. And some fans will think that, yes, the animated film does follow the book very well to a certain point. And there are even parts of the film that cover the book better than the Peter Jackson versions. And vice versa. Even the Peter Jackson versions have parts of the films that follow the book way closer than the animated movie does. But again, it's all about night and day. I would say if you have kids, young kids that really want to get into Lord of the Rings, and you think that the live action versions may be a bit too intense for them, you can start with this one, because this one is actually not bad. It's PG rated too, so it's actually, young kids can get into this one. But unfortunately, with its daunting runtime of 133 minutes, at the time, this was one of the longest animated movies of all time, and yet it actually still is. But there have been many films made that actually dwarf the runtime on Lord of the Rings. Heck, there's 3 movies that were made in Japan that have a runtime of 150 minutes, and some of them even over 160. So, but nonetheless, with its daunting runtime and the fact that this film is kind of a drag fest, because there are many parts of the movie that tend to drag. But like I said, it does add to the charm of the film, and there are parts of the movie that, look really good, and there are parts that don't. So that's my personal review on The Lord of the Rings. The movie itself, I would say watch it. If you can find it, I would definitely give it a watch. Yeah, for many, I mean, if you like the film, that's great. If you don't, that's okay. But again, the critical reception is still mixed to this day. I would say now it's probably worse because everybody's comparing this one to the live action versions, and honestly, because Peter Jackson had 3 films to flesh out the entire trilogy, and Ralph Bakshi only had 1 movie, and he only managed to do 2 of the 3 books. As much as I would love to see Ralph Bakshi do his part 2 of Lord of the Rings, I don't know if he'd want to do it now because he was pretty bitter about the fact that a live action film went into development without his knowing. And it upset him. So maybe that's why he didn't want to do part 2, or he moved on to other things. But like I said, he didn't have the money or he didn't have the finances to do part 2. So, like I said, the movie, I'd say, gets a pass for me, but obviously is nowhere, in my opinion, nowhere near as good as the live action versions. But again, you be the judge. The Blu-ray is a mixed bag. The video is problematic, but it is watchable. The audio, like I said, better than the video. The extras include just a solo documentary, and that's about it, but it's still worth a watch. So the Blu-ray, if you can find it at a good price, yeah, it is kind of hard to find I don't know how much it is right now. I haven't looked at the pricing of it online, but yeah, if you can find it at a good price, I'd say give it a look. So this concludes the presentation. I hope you all have a good day, and take care.